Welcome back to Align Yourself podcast. I am your host, Ebony, and today I'm joined by Luke, a father, a husband, a coach, and mentor who's here to help us understand what's really happening behind the scenes of the government and what the mainstream media sells to us, to provide us with the tools on how we can best set ourselves up and our families for freedom. In this episode, we unpack how not to buy into the fear, control, and coercion, what digital ID really means, and how to set you and your family up so if and when the next pandemic hits, you're ready for it. Luke, welcome to Align Yourself podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us, Ebony. Stoked to be here and looking forward to having a good chat to you and your audience.
Luke, if there was one thing the person sitting with us today takes from today's episode, what would it be?
At the end of the day, everything that happens in the next couple of months, the next couple of years is going to be dictated by the choices that you make. And you have the power to empower yourself first and foremost and be sovereign in those decisions. So that would be what I would love for people to take today. It's that there's no savior coming to save anyone. There's no magic wand that takes choice, action, and empowerment in order to be able to stand in what you believe in and what that means for you and your family.
I want to touch on something you just said there. And this is something I've actually put on repeat inside my own mind, just as of recent, actually, is no one is coming to save you. And it has literally helped me get out of bed, go for a walk, go for a run, get to the gym, cook my homemade beautiful home cooked breakfast every morning. It's helped me really get up, and it's just been on repeat in my mind. No one is coming to save you. So if you don't get up and do it for yourself, no one's going to do it for you. So Luke, what led you to speaking out about what's going on in the world?
During COVID and the last pandemic, I guess, I sort of saw that a lot of people were operating from a place of fear and fight or flight and just falling into that survival mechanism and those routines. And so I kind of, while I was still active in those spaces and trying to support where I could there, I kind of made it a mission to go out and explore different avenues, different pathways, and make sure that I had lived experience to be able to offer people different solutions when the next thing came. And so I've been very, very private and not very much on the socials front for the last couple of years. And I saw the digital ID, CBDC narrative starting to come out and just a couple of different other things that I've spoken about on the socials recently around, surveillance and technocratic control and all the different things that are coming at us. And I was like, okay, cool. This is the time. It's the time to lead. It's the time to not hide behind different platforms and different spaces and really just share my voice and bring a really grounded perspective to a space that is often filled with a lot of hype and a lot of sensationalism, and try to be able to just give people information and allow them to do with it as they please. I'm a big believer in just providing info and supporting others in finding what resonates with them so that they can make the most aligned decision for themselves and the vision that they're trying to create. And for me, if we all operate in a place of truth for ourselves, first and foremost, that's going to create the best world for the next generation, including my kids and their kids to come. And I'm a big believer in nature and ecosystem. Always come from the mindset of leave the soil that I've grown from more fertile for the next generation. And that's part of this. Is we're at a real crossroads, in my opinion, as to how it's going to sort of two worlds sort of forming in many senses. I want to play my part in creating a world that I would love to see my kids grow up in, and that's my motivation.
I really loved that you highlighted that you want to look after the soil and make it more fertile for our future generations. And the reason that what led me to wanting to start this podcast is about 5 years ago, I went on my quote unquote low tox journey. What led me to that is reading a book called It Starts Within the Egg. And that book led me down the realization that we are becoming infertile. And if I don't want to hold my children as they grieve the loss of not being able to have kids when I could have done and made better decisions in my time of being a parent, then I would do everything I possibly can, because I've never want to remove that this gift of being able to produce life from them. But Before we continue into our next question, Luke, I just want to take a minute to thank today's sponsors, Jacinta Corner Skin. Jacinta is an holistic skin therapist and a qualified corneotherapist, helping you get to the root cause of your skin concerns. Jacinta offers personalized in-clinic and online consultations using only high-quality, natural and fragrance-free skincare, including the renowned Dermavisions range, which I've been using for a few years now, and honestly, I can't recommend enough. And just for our listeners, you can enjoy 10% off your consultation plus she ships Australia wide, so you can access professional skincare support from the comfort of your home. To book in or browse her range, head to Jacinta Corner Skin. Now, let's get back into today's episode with Luke, who is about to share with us exactly how we can set our families up for freedom in a world that's closing in on freedom before our eyes. Luke, if the person sitting with us here today wants to learn exactly what your formula is to setting the family up for sovereignty in all forms, where should they start?
Geez, great question. I think first the mindset piece, as we've been talking about in regards to you are the one that you've been waiting for. Like there's no one coming to save you. We've been like connect back to that inherent nature within first and foremost and get clear on the vision of what you're trying to create and what you actually accept in the world. What are your values? What are your standards? Start there. That's like the foundation stuff that you can continue to come back to and anchor yourself in as resistance comes up, as pressure forms, as the fear narratives start to come through. That's going to allow you, one, to be really true to yourself and understand who you are and what you want to create in the world, but also start to find more aligned community that can support you as well and can hold you in that. That's going to be so, so important for us moving forward. In regards to some, I guess, tangible things, first you want to have a look in your life as to where you feel like someone else is in control of something that you value. You know, whether it's your finances, whether it's your banking, whether it's your food supply, whatever it is, like audit that stuff and see where am I relying on that. Maybe there's a lot of single mums out there listening that are relying on those payments, that are relying on government spaces. How can I go out there and create something different so I'm not reliant on those things? Because so often we get caught in that survival loop of, geez, how am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to do this? How am I going to be that? And so if we can start to look at those things first and foremost, then you can come up with a plan for change. Then you can start to look into different ways to get into decentralized spaces. Then you can start to come up with a plan for how you're going to respond to the digital ID verification stuff that's coming out. Maybe how do I get myself in a position to be able to say no to the government when they say, well, you need to use my Gov ID in order to get access to those Centrelink payments now, those kind of things. But if we don't look at them and we leave them as the big scary monster under the bed, that's what they'll turn into, you know. And when the time comes when we have to actually stand in our values, we'll get into a fear response because we just don't have a pathway. We don't have a plan. So that's probably the first place to start, is really auditing that sort of stuff and then going, okay, cool. What are my steps from here? You know, do I want to debank totally? Do I want to use something that's like a trustify.com, for example, where you can have a bank without a physical bank location, essentially? Those kind of platforms. Do I want to get a different aspect of KYC? Do I want to get a different form of identification? Do I want to look at different passports? Like all of these kind of solutions start to come in. But again, every individual is different. Everyone's going to have a different level for risk. Everyone's going to have a different tolerance for what they want to create in the world. So start with like something simple. Maybe you just want to get your data into something that you control. So rather than using Google Drive, for example, you start to use like a blockchain technology like Cirrus Safe, which is on a blockchain that's military encrypted. That's essentially you own that data and you are the one that are completely in control with it. Maybe you want to stop using Zoom, you know, because Zoom's just a data farm. It tells you where you're like, who you're having a meeting with. It transcribes everything. It's just collecting data. So maybe you want to start with that and use like a different alternative for Zoom, Proton email, those kind of things. Like there's small steps that you can start to take to build confidence to then go, okay, what's next? How can I then create wealth? How can I then diversify across different places to then be able to set myself up to navigate whatever storms come at us?
Can you explain in further detail the where digital ID is taking us and why we should be concerned?
Digital ID as a technology isn't evil, right? Like for me, my greatest concern is who owns the data, who owns what's happening with it. So let's just take the social media verification stuff that's coming up in December. One, it's going to be hilarious. Like that's got so many gaps in it that there's going to be lawsuits flying left, right, and center. Like it's going to be really interesting to watch that space. But as it sort of stands, if it's just KYC, like every one of us has probably KYC'd to do something.
You've mentioned KYC a few times. What is that?
So KYC is the Know Your Customer system. So it's an online verification that most people now will have to use to open a bank account. Telstra use it for your phone services. But essentially, you basically upload your government ID to that server. It verifies who you are. And on the back end, they're not supposed to keep or store that data. They're just purely supposed to use it for verification and then delete it. Now, whether they do or not, it's hard to know. But again, you can request that they delete that information once you're verified. So if it's just KYC, it's not the end of the world, right? Like the biggest thing is I like to think that my most valuable asset is my time and my energy. And my second most valuable asset is my data. And so when you start to think of that, it's like, okay, well, who's owning my data? What are they using it for? So if it was a government-backed digital ID that you had to have in order to have access to your social media, then I would have a lot of problems with that. Because when we start to see a centralized system of control, and we're starting to see that anyway, and a lot of these things in isolation don't really mean too much to the everyday person that's probably too distracted paying the bills, just really focused on just surviving. And that's all part of the plan, right? Is to get us in this survival state where we're just focused on surviving so that we don't look deeper and we don't take the time out to actually research because we're, again, like we said earlier, conditioned to look for that savior. Conditioned to just do as we're told, conditioned to think that the government looks after us and that's all going to be all right.
Yeah.
So if you start to look at the digital ID, so every transaction, everything that's linked, and the thing that sort of really set me down this path was seeing that the finance department was the ones that are like introducing the bill to the Senate. So what does finance have to do with digital ID? Why is finance running that department and being in control of that rather than your social services or, a digital ID infrastructure committee? So that really intrigued me. I was like, okay, that's interesting because now we're linking digital ID to money. And then we look at Project Acacia, which is the government's CBDC trial, so centralized digital currency. So essentially think of like an online Aussie dollar. Again, great from a technology point of view, not so great when it starts to get linked with a digital ID. Then we start to look at some of the surveillance technology that the government's investing in. We start to look at all of these different aspects, even fuel stations being privatized. And all of a sudden, we start to see money, food supply, currency, digital ID, movement, road usage, registrations, all being linked in this one big web of technocratic control. And when we start to see that, we start to see the real foundations of a surveillance state. And that's my concern, where every transaction is restricted. And we start to see the basis and foundation of a social credit system, where you get restricted for what you say, where media is controlled even more so than it is now, where if you speak out against what the government approves as the right, vaccine's a great example, but the narrative, all of a sudden you can't access certain places in society. You can't go to the pub. You can't do these things. You can't get your food. All of this becomes controllable. And they're already talking about expiring currency. They're already talking about just this week, the new AFP commissioner is talking about targeting groups that interrupt and hinder social cohesion. Now, what's social cohesion? To the government, social cohesion is obedience. So that is anyone that speaks out against the narrative. The AFP has now actively come out and said that they're going to go after them.
That you or me.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a parent who wants to raise healthy kids and isn't afraid to do so outside of what the government recommends as health. And I just want everyone to hear that. This doesn't have to be someone that is crazy. This can be an everyday person like you and me and the person that's sitting with us who's a parent who's not afraid to protect our children and our future children from, like, if they have anything to learn with me, it would be fertility. Fertility is my number one focus, and everyday toxins, everyday chemicals, you start to want to block it all out. But if you start speaking out about that, it's like I follow a girl, Ellie Gray in the UK, and she just had her bank shut down. People are getting their bank shut down for purchasing grass-fed meat.
Yeah.
Like they are. So there is this narrative to push us. And I'd love to see your perspective on climate change, because I think a lot of people still do believe in it. I reckon the last year started to go, hang on, is climate change even in real? We have been completely scammed. And this was the start to pushing us towards thinking that cows are literally damaging the
Yeah.
planet, and then to force us to eating all these processed foods, and all of our brains are then not all undeficient. I'm trying to think of the word, deficient.
Yeah.
Deficient.
Undernourished.
It
Yeah.
is
Deficient. Yeah.
yeah. And our brains aren't functioning. And so everyone's walking around. I just looked around and I thought, everyone is a fucking sleep.
Yeah. 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 Once you start to see it, like, it's very hard to unsee it, and that's again what I was sort of talking about. For those of you, some of you may have been in this space for a long time and have been frustrated at the growth and the take up of where people are at. And again, like, if we come at it from that frustration space, all we do is create more separation. So we've got to understand that everyone's exactly where they're supposed to be for a reason. Everyone's going through their journey, and everyone is absolutely complete for that moment in time. And when we come from that perspective, we can start to shift. And for me, there's a lot of fight, there's a lot of hate, there's a lot of anger in the world, and on all sides, And the only energy that's going to beat that is love and compassion and grace. And so in regards to these things, it's like, yep, like, you can see it might be frustrating, but there's also people that are just coming into that realization now and going, oh my God, like you just said there with the climate change stuff, it's like, this whole identity that I've created around this. And now I've got to learn to trust myself again. Now I've got to learn to have discernment again and question my other decisions and all of these kind of things. And yeah, look, I think climate change, for me, I sort of base anything like that. Who's saying, is the narrative like so in sync across all of the different spaces? Like, it's every government leader or every politician says the exact same thing. It's like, okay, they've been handed a script. Like, that's controlled. And you can see it like when they're talking about climate change. It's the same narrative, same with in the like the COVID pandemic. It was the same thing. The newsreaders are all saying the same things. It's like, okay, this is scripted. Do I believe that the earth has cycles? Absolutely. Do I think that there's changes? Absolutely. That's nature. That's ecosystem. It shifts and it changes and it evolves. Do I think that we as humans are having an immeasurable impact on the environment? No. Do I think that we're causing absolute catastrophe? Not in that way. I think we have an impact on the earth in many different ways. But in regards to climate change, the way I look at it, if the governments were really concerned about it, they wouldn't be flying private jets everywhere every single day. It's all good. It's one of those ones where it's like, we're going to do this over here because we can do that, but you need to like not use plastic forks. It's like, come on. So that's, to me, that's where I sort of sit with it. Like, but it's the same as all of these narratives, right? You can see, you kind of feel when it's a forced position. And you start to see like, okay, well, the actions of those who are preaching this to us don't really line up with what we're seeing. Because all we're seeing is more like mass farming and more clearing, when realistically, if we were super concerned about it, we'd be planting more trees, planting food forests, and we'd be doing all of these things to actually create a sustainable ecosystem. But all we're seeing is this consumerism, materialistic conglomerates that are like bulldozing land, raising the price of everything and feeding to the top. And so we see that across all of these spaces. We see it across the financial industry. We see it across environmental. We see it across even Amazon and like retail, and fueled our like this privatization and these conglomerates that are owning everything and then dictating the rules. And again, that ties back into the digital ideas, right? It ties back into that centralized control system. There's a reason when, you create organizations, you create separation across like the finance team and the other teams. It's to hold accountability, and so that there's not this like one message narrative, which is what we're seeing now with the UN, WEF, all of these different agendas that are coming through. Digital ID is the gatekeeper and the gateway to that world. For anyone that's listening, that's heard of like Agenda 2030, like digital ID and centralized digital ID, like controlled in a government body, is the gateway to that. Because once they have that, they see everything. They start to be able to create behavioral data sets on each and every one of us, our patterns, the way in which we shop, who we talk to, when we talk to them, where we do it, when we buy this, when we buy that, It's just data, it's data collection, and you want to be able to stay in control of that.
Everyone talks about changing the system, but something that you've shared on your socials is we must more focus on changing ourselves. Can you speak more into that? So the person that's listening gets a really deep insight into the power and focusing on what we can control.
I'm a big believer that our attachment to our first person identity and who we think we are is our biggest limitation to our growth. So the expectations that we place upon ourselves, the identities that we hold, all of those kind of things. And when we realize that, and when we start to see that, we can start to make those shifts. And I do talk about changing the self first. And Einstein actually said, like, the energy that you see the problem in will never be the one that finds the solution. You can't find the solution in that same energy. And so it's something we're really focused on with our Telegram group and even in the Facebook group that we've created around these topics is that mindset and empowering individuals to go, okay, cool, what can I control? If I'm the predominant creative force in my life and I'm the one that I've been waiting for, what choices can I make to feel more empowered in this? Can I reach out to someone? Can I start to move, you know, maybe I can buy a little bit of gold or a little bit of silver. Maybe I can start to find communities where there's co-ops and there's peer-to-peer exchange rather than using centralized exchanges where the middleman just keeps taking a cut, those kind of things. But in order to do that, you've got to understand yourself. And that's why I constantly talk into working on the self first and foremost, because you will be challenged. There's such like a narrative and force behind what we're seeing going on in the world. There's a lot of power behind it. There's a lot of money. You can call it evil if you want to. You can dive into this good and evil battle like if you want to. But again, it's like in order to be able to navigate that, you've got to know who you are. And you've got to be clear in your values and the standards at which you want to show up in the world, because that's your legacy. And as a parent, and this is one of the things I don't like about the digital ID, is that the government is trying to tell us how to parent. Essentially, they're saying that we can no longer be responsible for our children. And that's what they're trying to take away from each and every one of us. They're trying to say that you aren't responsible enough to make sure that your child doesn't look at the things they're not supposed to on the internet. And they're doing that in so many different ways with schooling, with the education system. And so when I think about being a parent and I think about legacy, legacy to me is how I show up each and every moment. That's what my children will remember, and in order to do that, in order to know that, I have to understand my values and my standards. And if you can do that, then you'll be able to navigate things. You won't always make the right choice. You sometimes will take a backward step. But if you keep moving towards that vision, you will get there. And so that's why we always encourage people to bring it back to what can you control? They're going to push it no matter what. The government's going to do their thing. The best thing that we can do and the most power that we have is to start taking action outside of it. As to say, we see you, we see what you're doing, but we're going to go over here and we're going to do this. Because at the end of the day, you are a human being. And that's a really important phrase to understand. Human being. Like, just be you. That's what you're here to do. We all have a purpose. Anyone that says that they're not important or they don't have a role to play, just think about how many things had to go right for you to be here right now in this moment so that you could do something, so that you could be. You think about that with your parents. Think about their parents, how many things went right in their life for them to make. Then their parents who survived world wars, all of these things that happened for you to be here right now in this moment. And people try to say that they're not important, that they don't have a role to play. I think it's madness, and that's my opinion, and everyone's entitled to their own, but everyone has a role to play with this. Everyone has a purpose. Everyone's here for a reason. I'm a massive believer that we all have a unique wisdom to share, and that comes through our lived experience. And so something that we promote within our spaces is bring your experience, bring what you're working on. This isn't a top-down model. This is a collection. This is a collaboration. Everyone is on their journey for a reason, and everyone's going to ask the question that they need to at the right time and bring what they need to. And that's how ecosystems work, right? That's how nature works. Everything works in unison for the greater good. Everything gives back more than it receives, and therefore it receives more than it gave in the first place. And when we live like that, we start to create these beautiful systems of thriving spaces across all aspects of our life. Like, I don't have the lifetime to live your life, but I can learn from your experience and your wisdom. And I think that's part of what we're all here to do, is to live our life and to experience and then share that information. So collectively we all learn and we all grow. And that's why we encourage people to live, and we encourage people to be and be a human being, and understand that at the end of the day, like, there are, in my opinion, two or three forces on this planet, or in whatever you want to call it, that can control how you spend your lifetime and your life source. And that's God, nature, and the universe, whatever you want to put your power into. Anything outside of that doesn't have control over you. I think that's the big message with anything that comes from a legislative point of view, anything that's mandatory. At the end of the day, it's you. You are a human being and you control your life. And when you understand that, then all of a sudden you start to see just how much power you have, just how much impact you can actually have on the world, and how you can be an inspiration for others, how you can be prepared to stand. Because at the end of the day, it's, again, what's important to me is like how aligned we live our life. I'd much rather live an aligned life and be proud of that when I get to the end of it than go, oh, I just bent over and got slapped on the bum by Gov Daddy every day. So
Look, I constantly look back on COVID times and I realize that the one thing I really had missing from my life at that point that I truly believe would have helped me get through the mandates without being without taking the vaccination was having a solid community of people around me to stick together. But however, I was the only one at that time of my life, and that was saying, "This doesn't feel right," whilst everybody else was saying, "I don't wanna get it," but the following day, they were lining up to get it because of travel and the family and all of the things that we were sold. And ultimately, after a long battle, I took it. And ever since that moment, I've taken a vow to never allow anything to happen to my body and to show my kids that we do what feels right. And by intuition, by gut, and we won't ever let anybody else make a decision on what goes in or onto our body. But at the same time, we are tribal creatures and we're wired to fit in. And since that time, I have built that community around me, and I feel like we have that support now. But I just can't help but to worry that my loved ones, and my friends' loved ones will comply if things like travel, freedom, and money is taken away from them again. And if the person that's listening needs help building the confidence in standing strong in their values and beliefs, despite what their loved ones say, my advice would be to find your like minded tribe, even if they're outside of your family and your current friends. What would your advice be?
yeah, very similar. Like, community is so, so important to be able to have that just support to fall back on, but also know that, like, you're so much more capable than you give yourself credit for. Like, that you will be okay. You might be alone for a little while, but through that loneliness and through that suffering, you will find ease. And there's a lot of different scripts, a lot of different religious texts out there that talk about suffering, and that peace and ease are not possible without knowing suffering. And, you look at your own experience, Ebony, of like that decision led to this catalyst, which has now created this incredible community. And so we can have compassion for ourselves and not beat ourselves up and say, oh, well, I complied last time, so I might as well just comply this time. It's like, no, you don't have to. No, what's true for you? Know that by you stepping into that and stepping into alignment, you will be looked after and you will be okay. And because you step into that frequency, if we want to call it that, you will gravitate your community to you and you will create beautiful relationships because there'll be less masks. There'll be a deeper and quicker connection. There's less shit to wade through. It's just so much easier and quicker when you're living in alignment, and because you can just create a connection, go, I vibe with this energy. This is good. I like this. Versus what we're conditioned to do is like put all the walls up and then let people earn our trust. It's like, no, no, no. Just come in trusting, come in open. I know that's hard to do in the world sometimes, but just have discernment and go, like, I'm comfortable in who I am. And that's where I'm going to go here. And know that, whatever your decision is, it happened for a reason. And you standing up for what you believe in may inspire someone else too. And I've seen plenty of examples of that. I left a really set for life space during COVID and had so many people, like saying, oh, wish I could do it. Oh, you'll just roll over. You're not going to do that. You know, he's calling you crazy, checking in on you all the time. And it's like those same people now are like asking, how do I do it again? How do I stand in that now? Oh, you inspired me. I've had so many messages the last even just 12 months of people that have been like, I finally get what you were doing. I finally understand it. It's sunk in. Like I might not have understood it at the time, but I get it now. And just those little moments are like, cool. You know, you don't do it for that. You don't need external validation. You don't need any of those things. You just do it for you. But that just shows the ripple effect and how you standing in your truth may inspire someone to stand in theirs. And that's important, you know, whatever's aligned for you. So hope that answers the question. Bit of a tangent, but you know, you're all so much more powerful than you give yourself credit for.
What I've really heard you say there is that through every up level, so every time that you're doing something that steps outside of the comfort zone or steps out the box, it may be uncomfortable. And we're going to bring in that unsuffering moment because in my own journey, I have realized that every time I want to do something new, like start this podcast, all of this new background noise comes up in my mind telling me I'm not qualified or you can't talk, you don't know how to spell, like, or just all of this. We all have that voice in the back of our mind that's telling us. And what the difference is between you in that moment and other people, and that's not to compare whatsoever, but it's going, right, I'm going to step into it, even though I don't know what's on the other side anyway, and I'm going to work through, and it will be suffering, but on the other side is the freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a big perception shift, right? It's that going from that fixed mindset of this is the way it is, this is who I am, this is my identity, this is the stories, the beliefs, to the growth mindset. And for me, it's like basic physics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So for every level of expansion you're going to face, you're going to be met with an equal and opposite level of resistance. Once you realize that, you start to hunt the resistance. You start to look for it and go, oh, cool, there's growth here. All right, cool. There's expansion coming. All right, awesome. Let's dive in. There's nothing to be afraid of there. And the way I like to relate to it with like the people that I journey with as well is who's it actually challenging for? Like who's suffering? Is it the vision of who you want to become? Or is it the person you are right now? Is it the version of you are today? Who's actually suffering? I guarantee you, like 100% of the time, it's not the version of who you want to become. It's who you think you are right now. It's that version of you that you have to actually allow to go through the death and rebirth process, which we're kind of wired for as humans. You go through that rite of passage and allow that version of you to die so that you can be born into something new with a new identity, a new beliefs, a new like value set, essentially, you know. And we constantly go through that. People are going through it right now during this conversation, listening to this replay. They're having their conscious, they've got like 5% conscious thought in listening. Other 95% is this like narrative of being challenged, stories, beliefs, all of these things being challenged or reaffirmed in the background. And we're constantly going through that process. Our cells are constantly going through that process. And nothing can be born anew without that death and rebirth process. So once you start to see that, you start to understand that, and you start to sort of structure it into your life, you create the space to be able to listen to that. You create the space to be able to feel all those things.
An analogy that comes up from my mind listening to what you're saying right now is also that every time there is a level up, you have to be willing and okay that the universe, God, whoever, will shift away everybody that doesn't align with that vision. Because coming back to us tribal creatures, we hold on to what others may think of us in that new space. So if you're wanting to step into that new space, the people around you are going to be judgmental, throw daggers, throw knives at you. You then get to a point in your mind where you have to make a decision. Do I want to step into that new space and have all that lobbies, have all those people throw the daggers at me? Am I going to be brave enough to do it anyway and shut out that noise, and or two, potentially lose our if we've had in our life. And I have had to continue that in my mind with moving forward. I wanted to move because unfortunately, stepping up does require letting go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like, you know, from a connection and relationships or even epigenetics point of view, we create those relationships from a place of shadow. Initially, we connect to make ourselves feel comfortable in our own shadows, in our own vulnerabilities, in our own traumas, essentially. And so when we start to work on that, we start to shift it, no longer that relationship, there's no connection there. And so we naturally start to create that separation as well. And that's what you're talking about there in regards to when we think about rite of passage, we have to get removed from our influences to be able to formulate our own opinion. That's what rite of passage is, right? It's like coming of age, becoming who you are, removing yourself from all of that. And then you have to be, not only do you have to see yourself as that and be able to hold yourself in it, but your community has to see that there's been a change. And if they're not willing to do that, then you need to make a decision around, well, is this somewhere where I want to put my time and my energy? If my time and my energy is my most valuable asset, am I getting the return on investment that I want from this relationship? And we have a mantra that comes from that sort of ecosystem framework that we teach in all of our structures. And the mantras align the output of your energy, the vision of the inputs you wish to receive. And so if you put energy somewhere and you're not getting what you would love back, either you're not showing up to it correctly and you're out of alignment, or the space that you're putting energy to is out of alignment. And so then you just have a choice. Am I willing to accept that in my life or not? It makes it very, very simple. Takes away all of the noise, all of the stuff. And you may say, yes, I'm willing to accept that. Sometimes you do when it comes to family. Sometimes you do when it comes to a friendship group for a while. Whatever it is for you, like understand that, make it a conscious choice. Don't do it subconsciously. Try and make as many of those choices conscious as you can so that you're in ownership and you're responsible for that. Good, bad, and ugly, you're the predominant creative force in your life. So as soon as you take that radical self-responsibility and put your hand up, and all of a sudden you can start to make those changes of, okay, is this aligned? Is my friendship group actually serving my vision? Or am I just serving theirs? And for any of you listening that have gone down the personal development pathway and like have been an overgiver or an oversharer, you probably know exactly what we're talking about when you start to put a boundary in place and you start to prioritize your own energy. And all of a sudden, people within your network go, "Oh, you've changed. This doesn't feel quite right. What's going on here? Are you okay?" It's like, well, there's no longer that you've stopped that energy leaking to them. You're now in control. You're now in more empowerment of yourself and those within your network who have been benefiting from you not being in ownership of your energy, feel that difference. And they start to question it. They don't like it because it challenges the norm. It puts them into survival mode, and the brain doesn't like that. Doesn't like the change. It doesn't like the uncertainty. So just know that if you're experiencing those things, like, and you're acting in alignment, keep acting in alignment. Don't be afraid of being a little bit isolated for a little while, but also don't like throw yourself into isolation. Make sure you seek community, make sure you reach out, find aligned people like this community here, or there's so many communities out there that I'm sure align with you. Um, Go and find them. Be willing to reach out, and you'll find that those people welcome you with open arms because they know exactly where you're at.
What would be the basic steps to take responsibility for your family's health and well-being moving forward?
For me, it's understanding like your food sources for sure, like understanding what's going in your body, like consumption. We are what we consume, right? Our inputs equal our outputs, and that's across media, that's across food, that's water, that's everything, right? And so having an understanding of where that comes from, first and foremost, from a health perspective, is going to be so, so important. Also, owning your own data around your health, like not falling into the trap with all these biometric tracking apps like Strava, all these fitness apps that track when you sleep, where you do it, where you move, track all of your data and information. Most of those apps, they're selling your data to medical firms. They're selling your information to create the world that we're in around like pills and pharmaceuticals, all of those fun things. So just understanding that and going, okay, well, I want to make sure that I own my data from a health and well-being perspective. And then from, I guess, the main one, we still live in a world that revolves around currency. We've been conditioned to trade our time for that. So from a health and wellness perspective, being able to create more abundance within your life, whether that's diversification, whether that's decentralized ways where you're in control and it's autonomous with you and you have a lot more sovereignty in that space so that you can live the life that you want to live. You can afford the things that you want to do. You can create that abundance so that you don't have to sacrifice your health. We talk about this all the time with my partner, especially when we were starting our journey and really going all in on ourselves of like, oh, can we afford that service, or can we afford to buy organic? And it's like, what value are we placing on our children's health? All right, cool, we're going to get it. And we're going to trust in ourselves to create more. And we're going to trust in ourselves to bring in the abundance because that's where we want to be. And we're going to focus on that rather than on the fear and the scarcity, because those great sayings, your focus creates your reality. So you focus on the abundance, you're going to bring in abundance. You focus on the scarcity, you're going to bring in scarcity. And so those are probably like the key three places for me. Like, know what you're consuming across every aspect of your life, because that's going to dictate what you put out into the world. And then get clear on like your finances and understanding that your finances are your key to freedom. And a lot of people in the health and wellness spaces and spirituality push away financial security because they think they have to be, struggling and poor to be of service to the world. Not the case. You can be financially lit and sovereignly fit as well. You don't have to be one or the other. You're here to live in abundance. You can have it all. You can have it all without losing it all. So, make it a priority to be financially secure. Make it a priority to be able to say no when these things come. And when the world revolves around money, which it does at the moment, like it or hate it, understand that and go, okay, well, how can I be a part of shifting where that wealth goes? How can I be a part of shifting the flow of that currency into spaces that I would love to see in the world? Because that's what we need. We need more consciously minded people who are willing to create big things to challenge the current narrative, who are willing to be in abundance so that we can shift the flow, that we can show that it's possible to be consciously, spiritually minded and aligned and also create massive things in the world. Because most people believe that's not possible.
You spoke about finance. Is there a brief overview you can give us on what that may look like, that someone who's listening could open their eyes to a different perspective of earning income?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it's like understanding what your greatest asset is your lifetime and what you're trading that for. And then how do you generate more of that? Where do you create exchange with people rather than income, so to speak? Can you find co-ops where you can trade a skill? Do you have a valuable skill that you can give to someone else? Like income doesn't have to be like fiat currency. I think the more you shift that out of like abundance, shift that from that place of scarcity, and that's the only way to this more abundant mindset of like, one of the things that I love about cryptocurrency is that it's peer-to-peer exchange, how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be you and I create an agreement, and that's the value that we both believe is the equal and equitable value for that. And so we both receive that. There's no middleman. There's no one taking a piece of it and, impacting on the return on investment for your lifetime. You start to understand that principle. You start to understand just how much like control and power you do have in regards to a lot of different things in the world. But to answer your question in a really basic way, like there's so many pathways out there from a decentralization aspect, to be able to invest in the infrastructure of these blockchains and these communities that are trying to change the world, that are trying to do it in the right way, that are trying to create win-win scenarios for so many different people. There's blockchains out there where you can actually you can use tokens and invest in that space to buy meat direct from the farmer. There are blockchains out there where you can trade peer-to-peer with people. There are skill-based directories where you can trade a skill with someone for another skill. Now, all of these things are ways in which you can create sovereignty from a financial perspective. Starting points like audit, like where you're in control, like where someone else is in control, like a bank. Try and get out of the big four banks, like probably like one of the biggest things I can say to people, like any any bank that's involved in Project Acacia, so your big four, a lot of the subsidiaries, those kind of things, they're not going to want you to have control of your finances. They want you in the central control system. They want you being put into a CBDC system. They want you to be a bank for them for the rest of your life. And so anywhere that you can own the infrastructure of what you're trying to invest in as well, which you can do with a lot of the blockchains out there. And for those that don't understand what the blockchain is, it's sort of like a ledger of information. So a community. So think about a bank, for example. How good would it be if you could actually buy the infrastructure that controls your accounts? And then you're actively involved. You're an investor in that. Like, you have more control over it. You own it. Whereas at the moment, the banks all own it, right? So what you see with these communities that are popping up is that you can actually buy the infrastructure that allows those projects to move and create. So by being an active member of it, you're actively like pushing that in the direction of where you want to go in the world and what you want to be and what you want to see in the world. And so you're doing one of the things that you have the most power over, which is aligning your actions with your words and aligning your actions with your values and saying, this is where I'm going to invest in. This is where I'm going to put my time and my energy and my money, which is what's actually going to make change. Because it's all well and good having these conversations. It's all well and good going to rallies and speaking out. But if on Monday you go and buy a six-pack, crack that after you've done a hard day of work for a government body, and then say, oh, I showed them at the rally on the weekend, you're just being a part of the system. You're not actually taking. The government's never going to change, because what we're showing them, and the vast majority of people show them, is that all they really care about is being able to go to work, pay their bills, have a little bit of fun on a weekend, and if they can go and watch their favourite sporting team or go to the pub, they're going to be pretty happy. Because that's where we spend all of our time and our energy and our money, like as a collective. So we need to shift that and put that into spaces that are actually aligned with us and each and every one of us, whatever that is for us, and are moving towards the world that we want to create. So all of our projects that I'm involved in, they are actively working towards creating that world that I want to see for my kids. I don't put time and I don't put energy into anything. I wouldn't come on this podcast if I didn't believe that you were trying to create a better world, not just for your kids, but my kids included. And so the more people that live like that and the more people that spend like that and go and say, oh, I'm going to go to the local producer, I'm going to go to the fresh food space, and I'm going to pay $1 extra because it's important to me that I spend it here. The more people that do that, the more change we'll start to see. The more the government will actually listen, because at the end of the day, all they give a crap about is their profits. So yeah, start there, start in spaces and reach out, like ask. There's so many communities out there. There's so many options for people to be able to start to decentralize what they're doing, especially from a wealth generation opportunity. That, there's something for everyone.
For somebody listening, as well as myself, who wants to know a good bank to change to that isn't in the Big Four, do you have any recommendations that you could share with us?
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So I still use Bendigo. They're the bank that we've been with for a little while. They're pretty good. They will roll into CBDCs. So anything that's credit union and anything that's member owned are probably going to be last vestiges. But we've got to understand that anything that claims to be a financial institution is going to fall under the centralization aspect. So come 3-4 years down the track, they're all going to be in the same boat, in my opinion. Even the member-owned ones will have to comply. And so for now, there's those good options, which are like credit unions in your local area, anything that's like a member-owned bank in your private area, in your local area. So things like P&M Bank is a member-owned bank, as an example. Other things that I look for is, do they have in-person branches so that I can go and verify myself in person if I want to, rather than what we're seeing with Bank West and those other kind of branches that are closing down all of their in-store places. So that you have to go online, which means you have to use their online verification tools, which means you just have to get a digital ID. But they're just making it mandatory by removing all the other options. Credit unions, member-owned banks are good from a centralized perspective. There are things like Trustify.com, which I can give you a link to put underneath the session, which is more of a bankless solution. So they're not tied to any of the banks here in Australia. You don't have to use a bank account with them. You can use a crypto wallet with them if you want to, but you can also get a bank account in a euro. You can also get a USD account. They have lower transaction fees. They're on a blockchain, so it's more secured. They're, what I like to say is centralized decentralization. So it's still a financial institution. So they still fall under all of that regulation and regulatory body. But, from a being able to have more control and autonomy over what you're doing and not be so beholden to what the Big Fours are bringing through, and being able to stay outside of the CBDC, for example, they're a great option. They lower transaction fees, the ability to move money anywhere around the world because they don't have a physical location. And I guess the other aspects of that is diversifying into gold, silver, just metals, those kind of things, and having some different value holds. There's a place on the Sunshine Coast called Harrington's where you can get now gold-backed notes. So they literally have like a note that's got a gold layer over it. So it's got a fixed value. And they do fractions so that you can transact peer to peer. So you don't have to buy like an ounce of gold or an ounce of notes. You can buy fractions of an ounce. And therefore, you're just another method of exchange. I think that's where we're moving towards. And that's what we're looking at is different methods of exchange. How can I bring my exchange back to a decentralized sense where it's peer to peer, where they cut the middleman out?
So would you be doing that with crypto as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, you look at all your centralized exchanges as well, like they're all centralized for a reason. There's some good ones out there, like Pay It Now is probably one of the best ones called PIN. They're probably one of the best centralized exchanges out there, but they're still centralized, right? And so next year, the CAF crypto asset regulatory frameworks come in, which means that the reporting goes through the roof for those centralized spaces. And so the window is closing to get into truly decentralized spaces where you can actually move your currency around and no one can see that. Because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that autonomy in that space. I'm looking for no one knows what I have sole responsibility of what I do with my financial system and my life. And that's what I look for in those spaces. So yeah, I've been looking at, if you're into crypto, looking at ways in which you can invest in decentralized infrastructure. So instead of keeping your money in a bank, for example, where it's just getting eaten away by inflation, investing that in the infrastructure of these blockchains, it's investing in the infrastructure of the way you want to see the world go. Because the more people that do that, the more that world's going to come into reality. We can either sit it in a bank and have it eaten away and allow the banks to use it and loan it. If you understand the fiat system, you understand how the banks use your funds to then loan it out and make millions off the back of it. You may as well have that in your possession and be generating it for you rather than for the banks. That's my view on it anyway.
If the person that is sat with us today is still here, I commend you because one of the biggest things is when we do not understand something, we tend to turn fearful of it or tend to disassociate from it. And so either we need to become more educated in it or we tend to just shut it off. So if someone listening is feeling fearful of what the future will hold, what would you say to them?
That it'll all work out exactly how it's supposed to work out. But reach out. Like if you're afraid and you're fearful, reach out to community, find like-minded people, jump on a call, like come and say hello, like, and ask you questions. Like jump into our Telegram space, ask you questions. We're in there answering questions for people all day, every day. So jump in, say hello, or reach out to Ebony. She'll steer you in the right direction as well, I'm sure. It's like, take that action. If you're feeling the fear, step into it like we've spoken about. There's nothing to fear at the end of the day. It'll all work out exactly how it's supposed to work out, and you will survive it. So, yeah.
All right, I have some community questions for you, Lou. Someone has written in, I just want to know, apart from saying goodbye to things like social media, YouTube, Netflix, Spotify, potential email platforms, what else will we lose access to if we choose to opt out? And what are the recommended alternatives?
Like I said earlier, like it's still super grey what they're actually going to restrict. So it's really hard. Like we're planning multiple different ways at the moment. We're coming up with multiple different plans. And like I said at the start, like for social media, it really depends on what the method of verification is going to be. Like if it's just that know your customer, like I said, there's ways that you can go and get a e-residency from another country and then use that as your verification method. As a government-backed thing, then you can use that and it doesn't link you to, say, your Australian ID, for example. So then you're verified, you can use the platform. Anyone that's got a business account with Meta, anyone that's got a business like profile, you've probably already had to verify your identity anyway. So I'll be very surprised if they remake you do that. So I think there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of like sensationalism into what we're going to lose. For me, it's just understanding what it is that you want to be, I guess, investing in your time and your energy. Do you want to be investing in a social media app that is going to push this on the population, regardless of if it's easy to get around or not? Is that something you want to support? If it's not, then there's other options out there. You know, there's the guys at FGNX Social are working on like a decentralized social media platform. Mastodon's decentralized. There's Telegram, there's Element, there's Orion Messenger. There's like a few other different platforms out there for people to use. Same as Spotify. I know there's blockchains out there right now they're working on creating subscription services on a decentralized platform for people to just put their music on. Like I'm involved in one of them right now. They've got one of the biggest labels coming over and putting their music onto their platform as we speak. You know, it's like there's things out there. So I think you're not going to have to run into the forest and completely remove yourself from everything if you don't want to do this, if you don't want to comply. There's going to be ways to stay connected and actually thrive. And I think a lot of people will actually be better off, you know, not being on social media regardless. But there's options out there, and those are some of them.
I also want to know and touch on because I believe that for most people who received the COVID vaccine would have already signed up to digital ID. So if they have, how do they go moving forward and removing themselves?
Yeah, cool. So at any stage, you can request for that information to delete it. In every privacy policy, it's like a privacy rule, essentially, that you can, if you look into the privacy policy of the digital ID or the MyGov ID that you've got, there will be a way for you to remove yourself from that. Now, they may make it really, really hard, and I don't have one, so I haven't looked into this policy. But if you go into the policy for MyGov, for example, there will be a way for you to request that they delete your data and remove that account. And there's one of those on every single thing that you sign up to. Every term and condition, every privacy policy has a way for you to send a letter and an email and remove your data from it. So that would be the pathway for that. And also know that like with this digital ID stuff, like any government service like is legally required to give you another option. It says that in the legislation. It says that in Section 74 of the Digital ID Act that third-party providers and government agencies, crown authorities, have to provide another option for verification. It can't be mandatory.
I noticed that in WA, they're doing a tree rebate. Like if you buy a native tree for up to the value of $150, you get something back when you sign up to Service WA. And so I have been sitting on this rebate, been like, so I went and bought the tree and then I went to jump online to follow the prompts and I realized it was to sign up to Service WA. And I was like, oh, for fuck's sake. So I jumped online. No, actually, my girlfriend, she advised me you could do it by paperwork. So I filled out the paperwork, printed off the invoice from the nursery. You needed to send in the also of the plant, so the pictures of the tree and the little tag. And so then I took photos of it and emailed it in, and didn't have the email on there, so I had to search for it on the internet. Emailed it in, and then they said, no, you need to post this in and include a photocopy of your 100 points of ID. So I had figured, well, I'm just not going to try and get the rebate. It's only $150 because I could only see, well, they're just going to be getting my ID and putting up there anyway. And then I'm like, there's an also part of me that's like, and I think there'll be people listening as well, being like, well, if I'm not doing anything wrong, what's so bad about them knowing everything about us?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is like everyone's going to have to make that decision for themselves, right? That's that risk or that like level that I was talking about before. And you will find that they'll just make it harder and harder and harder to not use it, right? It'll become mandatory through like ease and they understand that humans like comfortability and they like convenience. And so we generally will just go, stuff that's too hard, I'll just get it. It won't be that bad. But like I said earlier, like digital ID, government-owned digital ID is the gateway to complete technocratic control. You think about those movies where you see people go and like buy things and they can't because they've used up their allocation of meat for that month. You think about carbon credits, you think about your travel, you think about all of those restraints. That's only possible if there is a mass uptake of digital ID. And people will say, oh, that's not going to happen. It's already happening now. In India, their ADAR card that they brought in, it was already ruled in the Supreme Court that it could not be mandatory. You now cannot open a bank account without it. You now cannot study without it. It's very, very difficult to even get an education without it. It's very, very difficult to even get a job because most of the jobs now default to ADA as the know your customer KYC verification. And so it's now become mandatory to have any level of living in India. You look at China and the way that they have their social credit system. They literally have a system that if you say the wrong thing on social media, it blasts you across billboards within their towns. And they say that this person is not to be trusted. This person is a threat to the democracy of China or whatever they call it. But they literally have billboards. And you can go and see this, like it's on the internet. You can go and watch it. That's what digital ID brings. You know, when it's controlled by government, which is like the My Services and them having your information and then building those footprints. It's no different to loyalty rewards programs. Your loyalty rewards program that you get $10 for every like 1,000 that you spend at Woolworths, that data is worth so much to them because they know when you buy it, how much you buy it, where you buy it from. All of those loyalty programs we're starting to see on the fuel stations now. It won't be too long until you'll get rewarded for buying fuel from certain places. And when you do that, you start to see that they're the only option. So you don't notice that all the private, the owned ones get bought up and they close down. And all of a sudden, the fuel control, the fuel system is completely privatized and owned by the same people that own the frameworks for digital ID, the same people that run the systems for CBDCs. And all of a sudden, if you say the wrong thing, you can't go and pay. You know, you can't go and get fuel. You can't travel. You can't move. You're starting to see all these pushes for these smart cities, you know, and they already tested this out in China too. Of like, you can't go and spend money in that village. You can only spend it here. That's what digital ID leads to, you know, and that's obviously an extreme outcome, but everything that we're seeing leads to that. You look at Palantir, you know, Peter Thiel and those guys that are all involved in the PayPal mafia and who are involved with the US government and its technocratic surveillance, and they're involved in projects here in Australia. You look at some of the content that I've done on SouthPAN, which is a satellite monitoring surveillance system used for road toll, used for, you know, they say it's to help with farming and real life, but they can pinpoint data up to 10 meters accuracy in the middle of nowhere. Like, why do they need to do that? They even talk about in their presentation, they talk about getting cattle and using shock collars based on the GPS and the satellite to get them to eat in alignment. You know, like that's the technology that they've got. And so when you start to look at those things and you start to see, and I don't say this to scare people and fearmonger or hype it up. I'm just saying that this is a very real possibility that starts if there's mass uptake of a digital ID controlled by the government. That's the stepping stone to that. And we're already seeing the infrastructure there. We're already seeing examples of this in the UK, for instance. The UK Prime Minister coming out and saying, you will need to have a digital ID to be able to work in this country. Like, it's already here. And so it's not something that's coming.
That will only work if everybody goes and signs up. If they
Exactly.
get pushback, it won't work. And I think people don't realize they hold so much power.
Absolutely. Yeah,
but I think also people still look at the news and still look up to we're protected by the government. And again, I don't want to just speak in a fearful way, but I never forget throughout COVID times seeing that the top 10 mass murderers in the world were all government leaders. I've just come back to that. Like, we have to be responsible and take responsibility for our family's health. But I actually had to have a bit of a laugh because when you were saying about Woolies and Coles, and I thought, well, they must think I'm vegan because I would never purchase meat from Coles or Woolies, where which is far
absolutely.
from true.
Yeah, and
But
it's a good point. Yeah.
Directly from farm.
Yeah. And look, it's a good point you make, like around most people are good and most people are pure of heart, you know, like 99% of the world is pure of heart. And so when it comes to, so it's not even possible because you see the good in people and we're conditioned to see the good in people and you want to see the good in people because it's so much better than the alternative. You know, like the ground shattering, those moments of awakening where you're like, crap. There are people out there that are malicious in their intent. And again, like I like to think of it like everything's neutral. So even good or evil is just our perception. You know, and those people in those positions, you know, like Bill Gates is a good example. I'm sure at some level he thinks he's doing the best thing for him and his family. He just doesn't give a crap about the rest of what it means for everyone else. He cares about the dollar signs. And you can see that in the way his actions are. And you can see that in the government. They care about the dollar signs. Because if these people really cared about humanity, the amount of waste we have from a food production point of view, we literally could have now a universal high income where every single person on this planet is living in abundance. We could have it today. It's a possibility with what we can create and what we've already got. And yet we don't, because a few people like try to monopolize that control for whatever reason, whether it be power, whether it be greed, whether it just be that they're from another planet and they're evil, whatever, like who knows? But like that's just a fact of life. And you have to be willing to accept that and to see that and go, well, maybe my government doesn't have the best interest at heart, because they've proven over the last couple of years that they don't. And you're seeing all the evidence of that come out now with everything that's coming off the back of COVID, and you've been able to see that. And I know that, like the Australian government, for example, was forced into doing all of those sort of things too. So a lot of people lay blame on like Prime Minister, for example, like Morrison during that time. He was forced to do that. Otherwise, the UN would have dropped Australia's credit rating, which would have bankrupted the country and would have sent every single person with a mortgage and a loan using Aussie dollars into financial ruin. So there's so many more layers to these sorts of things, and you have to understand, like, when people say the UN and the WEF and BlackRock and Vanguard control majority of what's going on, they're not sensationalizing it. Like, that infrastructure is so obvious to see. When you understand that those things, there's just like this minute few controlling so much of what comes out from a narrative point of view across the media, across your news corporations, across your businesses and all of those things. It becomes really easier still. And all we can do is control and go, well, actually, the only reason that system still survives is because I buy into it. Is because I put my time and my energy into it. And if I want to see change, then I have to be prepared to do something else. And I have to be prepared to have a crack. And if that falls over, what's the worst thing that happens is you go back to doing what you're doing now. But I'd rather have a crack at building something different and building something better than sitting there in 60 years' time and going, geez, I wish I'd stood up for something. Because what kind of a life is that?
I always come back to the quote: if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Look, we're getting to the end of our time together today. For the person that's listening that would love to hear more about what you do and how you serve the community, I'd love to be able to share it with them.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. I'll give you a link. Anyone's feel free to book in a call, say hello. Well, that's the easiest way, just to get on a call, chat, see where you're at, what's looking at. But also follow on the Instagram while it's still there, while I'm still using it. Come and join me in Telegram, those kind of things. Come and join us in the Facebook group. We run sessions every week. We have a community round table where anyone can bring an idea, where anyone can ask a question. That's on a Saturday evening, every Saturday. So plenty of ways to come and get involved. But yeah, the easiest one is call, say hello, ask questions, and go from there.
Thank you, Luke, and thank you for tuning in right to the end. Please send this episode to a friend, a family member, or your other half to ensure we are all working together to protect our kids and work together for a safer and brighter future. As always, thank you for being here on Align Yourself podcast. Until next time, stay aligned and stay aware and have an amazing day.